Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to the fifth session of our program this week on Humanity Rising on the Masculine Dialogues, which we're co-producing with the Luminary Leadership Institute and with Age Nation. It's been an extraordinarily deep conversation as we've been developing the various themes. We started out with a dialogue with Michael Meade and the very profound notions that he carries around man and the soul as one of the great mythologists and storytellers of our time. Then yesterday we looked at the man box and how patriarchy gets embedded in the psyche of men as well as women. But in this case, we were exploring the man box in relationship to the male psyche in a very, very nuanced way with men who had found themselves in the box and continue to struggle to get out of the box because the box is not so easy to overcome after 5,000-6,000 years of implantation. And then yesterday in our second session, we looked at man in relationship to women in a conversation that was utterly sublime in its elegance and its subtleties of how women interact with men in various stages of their own liberation and in the men's liberation. We are now coming in our fifth session, which is really at the center of the masculine dialogues, with really, I would almost say, the heart of darkness, as we're going to look at the deep trauma that men gripped by patriarchy have inflicted on women, sometimes volitionally, sometimes in great ignorance, but nevertheless with devastating force. And we're going to be talking with formerly Eve Ensler, in her latest bestseller, The Apology. Before we embark on that program, let us take a pause, as we always do, as we open up our Humanity Rising sessions. In the tumult of this world and all the contradictions that we face, the chaos that surrounds all of us, to just take a moment and center ourselves in our bodies and attune ourselves to our hearts, just for the next 90 seconds or so. Let us listen to our heartbeats in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that we're all alive at this extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today. I want to just note that I read V's work, The Apology, over the last week and was struck to the marrow of my bones with the cruelties that men have inflicted on women. And no one has chronicled this more exquisitely and with such devastating power than V. We know her most prominently from the Vagina Monologues, which ricocheted around the world 20 years ago, translated in nearly 50 languages in 130 countries, and was really a masterwork where one person's experience somehow was able to channel the experience of women everywhere, and in that sense captured a certain aspect of the zeitgeist that has been churned and challenged so powerfully by women since really after the Second World War in full force to gain liberation in a patriarchal world that had gone into, I would say, extremis and was the most brittle, but also the most susceptible to change. And over these subsequent decades, we've had a foment in the human psyche as institutions and beliefs and the shibboleths of power and theology and providence, structured so coercively by a patriarchal civilizational order worldwide, were challenged, shaken, and broken up. And V has been part of that lineage. Most recently, we've seen the Me Too movement. So we're dealing now in a highly dimensionalized fulcrum of fundamental sociological, anthropological, psychic, spiritual change, as the very notion of gender and sexuality is transformed globally right before our eyes, and in which all of us in some fundamental way participate. So today we're going to look at V's work, The Apology. And so V, I want to welcome you, and I also want to note that V has been responsible not only for major books in the culture, but has written and starred on various Broadway and off-Broadway plays. She's the founder of V-Day and 1 Billion Rising, which has raised money and supported women globally around liberating themselves and extricating themselves from the brutalities of the patriarchal order. She's written or finalizing new works that are going to be out in the market, and in fact has a play that's going to come out next spring based on The Apology. So V, just want to welcome you. Thank you for joining our Masculine Dialogues. And where I'd like to start is, how did, given everything you went through, how did the irritant of your sense that your father needed to apologize, how did that begin to incubate in your heart and soul? Because sort of like an irritant in an oyster, it has irritated you for decades and finally popped out as a best-selling work And I would love to have us be the benefit of you narrating that journey of how the need for an apology became so intense. You wrote a book channeling the apology that your father never actually gave you. So just tell us that story.
Thank you. Hi. Well, first of all, it's so wonderful to be with you and everyone who is on this Zoom. And thank you for that beautiful, beautiful introduction in all respects. The irritant. Yes, that irritant. Well, I think there are many factors that went finally writing that book. I think it began with my father abusing me for many, many years, and waiting while he was still alive for that magical letter or magical phone call that was going to arrive, apologizing that he would finally come to a new consciousness and see the error and see the sadness of his ways, and he would he would realize how horrible he had been, and he would do something about what he had done and make amends and take responsibility. And that did not happen. And then he died, and then there were 31 years that passed. And oddly, this may sound strange, I still was waiting for that apology. And I would find myself sometimes going to the mailbox as if it was going to be there. It was just this unconscious psychic need for him to make amends, for him to take responsibility, for him to own what he had done. So there was that all going on in my psyche. And then, having worked in this movement now, going on, it'll be 23 years in 23 that B-Day has been here, and seeing the new iteration of Me Too and seeing all these men who were being called out, I started to just look at men who had been called out, whether it was editors or writers or movie moguls or TV newscasters, and I couldn't see one apology. I didn't see one apology that any one of those men had made publicly. A real apology, that owns and looks at, which I'll go into depth later on. I saw men feeling victimized. I saw men feeling self-pity, that their careers had been ruined and taking up a lot of space writing about that. But I saw no men. And then I started to think, except for one TED Talk that I once witnessed, have I ever heard a man write or tell or speak an apology publicly that I could refer to? And then I started thinking about literature. Is there any place in literature where men have written an apology? Couldn't find one. And then I started to think, there must be something here about the apology. It is a pretty amazing absence when you think that 1 out of 3 women on the planet, which is 1 billion women, will be raped or beaten in her lifetime. And that's now. And for 5,000, 6,000 years of patriarchy, there isn't one written or spoken or out loud apology. I thought maybe it might be central to patriarchy itself. Maybe it's an actual column of patriarchy holding up this whole system. So I decided, this is so what women do, right? Violence against women, for example, was never our issue, right? We weren't raping ourselves, it turns out. We weren't beating ourselves. But of course, we went out and created movements to end violence against women, right? So I thought, in the same vein, maybe I just need to write my own apology to myself and climb inside my father and write the words I need to hear, tell the things I need to hear, have him go through an experience, because our perpetrators live inside us, right? I think in some ways we know our perpetrators, if we've lived with them, better than we know ourselves. We know their moods because we have to protect ourselves against them. We know when they're going to do what they're going to do because we're always ready for the onslaught. So I decided I would write his apology to me. And it was an astoundingly difficult, grueling, amazing, life-transforming, and in the end, very liberatory experience. And I feel, to be perfectly honest with you, that I now know more than ever that apology and reparations are at the core of what will be the transformation of patriarchy into a new way of thinking. Without it, it will never happen. It will never happen.
What do you think is so difficult for men, particularly men who've perpetrated great acts of violence toward women? What makes it so challenging, as you understand it now, V, to simply apologize? I mean, it's an astonishing thing that you couldn't find an apology in contemporary society or in literature by a man around violence toward women. What is it inherent in either the male psyche or patriarchy that makes an apology so challenging?
Well, there are many things.
You think?
There are many things. First of all, an apology is a humbling, and there's nothing about patriarchy that's humble. Secondly, it's about vulnerability and making yourself open and making yourself wrong. And men are never wrong, right? That's a code of patriarchy, like never apologize, never admit defeat, never admit you're wrong, because that admits vulnerability, which allows people to have power over you. Second of all, it would mean that other people were as important as you are, that other people's feelings, that what people have gone through actually matter as much as you do. And that's anti-patriarchal, because the only people who matter in patriarchy are the people with power, in terms of that framework. And I think also it would imply a certain kind of compassion, a certain kind of understanding, feeling for the people around you, which would again make you equal to those people, which would put you at their level. And in terms of my own father, and in terms of the patriarchs of his generation, we weren't equals. They were superior to us. They were above us. They, in the hierarchy of things, they would never lower themselves to apologize to us, because that would mean they would lose their status in some fundamental way. So I think I think to give, my father even told me in the book that to apologize is to go against all of men, because once one man begins to apologize, the whole story begins to crumble. And so I think one of the reasons we don't see any apologies is because there's been a kind of collective group agreement that will never occur, and we will never break ranks. And as you were talking about the man box, right? Because my dear friend Tony Porter created that idea. Once you're
He
in
was
that
on the
man
program
box,
yesterday.
yeah, I mean, he's
Yes,
just
beautiful man.
magnificent creature, just one of the most beautiful beings on this planet. But it's like you're not going to break ranks, and you're not going to leave that man box, and you're going to keep yourself there as long as you can possibly stay there. And even doing this book, where I was literally being inside my father writing his apology, I had to really work hard to get him to say things to me. He'd apologize for something very broadly, not even really apologizing. And then I'd have to go back over it and over it and over it until we really zeroed in and narrowed down on what he had actually done. Because in an apology, specificity is the key to liberation. Just to say, I'm sorry I hurt you, or I'm sorry you feel bad, or I'm sorry I did bad things doesn't do the trick. You've got to really get somebody to go, you've got to go into what you actually did. That's how a person gets free. Even that person inside of me or around me, because his ancestral self was very much present during the writing of the book, even that took days and days and days to break through, right? Because inside me, I hold patriarchy. And for me to even press my father to apologize was going up against some huge taboo in myself, right? That I had to keep working on in writing the book.
Right. Well, that was a question that came up to my mind. You just touched on it in terms of the ancestral memory of your father, knowing that the veil between the worlds is very thin, and that it is possible for us, the living, to commune with those who have gone before. How much contact, kind of existential contact in the spiritual realm, did you feel you actually established with your father as you were writing the book? because, sometimes it was clear to me reading the book that your father was coming in, and sometimes it would be you talking about your father coming in, and there was an exquisitely kind of mythopoetic blend of you and your father. I would love to just hear more about how much of your father you actually contacted on the other side, because it would be a wonderful thing to know that he really did apologize, even in the afterworld.
You're the only person in all the tours of the book that has asked me that question, and I'm so grateful for it. Nobody wants to talk about this, obviously, but you do, and I'm so pleased. What I would say is that the dead are always around us. Our ancestors are always around us, particularly those who have not managed to get free, and those who have not managed to work out a lot of stuff they needed to work out in this realm. And I think what this book told me is that we need to be in dialogue with them, and we need to help them. We need to help them. And by helping them, we help ourselves, obviously. Help is always two-directional, or it's not real help. But I think what happened for me is once I made the determination to do this book, to call up my father, he came like lightning. And he was here through the entire writing of this book, to the point where I would literally be asleep and he would wake me up and say, go to your office, I have a story to tell you. And I would write things that I had never heard in this lifetime. Like, he was definitely coming through me. And sometimes it was really almost unbearable, to be honest with you. It's just like I felt like what was inside of him was so dark. And so it was like tar. It was like tar. It was just like this thick tar. And I do believe with all my heart that my father was in a very bad place when this book began. He was stuck in some limbo world where he was just spinning and spinning and spinning. And I know that by the end of this book, he got free. He got somewhere else. Now, I don't know if he got to the big light place, but he definitely got out of a very terrible realm, and for me, he got gone. Like he went away. So for me, that was an incredible teaching about the realm, the closeness of realms, how when we hold people in our psyches, their ancestral makeup and their DNA is always traveling in through these inner realms and outer realms, and that we can, in fact, call on people, and we can, in fact, help people if we hear them in our psyches needing to discuss or to get free or to figure things out, and that was really a profound experience.
Well, and I imagine your father was deeply grateful to you, because I can just imagine, for 31 years, he's been in the anguish of, what Dante would call the purgatorio, that purgatory state where you're neither in heaven nor in hell, because you're still unable to process the anguish that you developed in your psyche while you were alive. So I can imagine you cut the cord that was keeping him to wherever he was in a very, very profound way. And it would be very interesting a year or two down the trail to see whether you communed again with him in an altered state for both of you.
That it would be interesting. What's funny though? I feel, and maybe this isn't true, I feel our work together is complete. I feel whatever he had to teach me, whatever I had to teach him, we're done. And it's one of the reasons I changed my name, because I felt after this experience that, I never know what lifetime I'm in. Like, is it, what segment of what lifetime we're moving through, but whatever that name was, it was attributed to, and it evolved from, and originated in a story that was over. And I no longer wanted to be in that story. I no longer was in that story. So I realized that I needed a name to match my new story. And it wasn't out of resentment, or I have nothing no rancor. I have no anger at my father. I have nothing, to be honest with you. I have nothing, but that was a story, and that story's over. And now we're on to this story. And I believe I did deep work with my father to help him get free. And that helped me get free, you know.
Mm, mm, mm. Well, let's talk, V, about your understanding of the power of apology. I know from a couple of your TED Talks and other YouTubes I was looking at that you have worked out sort of stages of apology, and would love to, given everything that you've been through, just talk to us for a few minutes about the what goes in to the kind of apology that truly redeems.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. And I think one of the things I want to say about apology is that it's a process, it's a journey. It takes deep consideration, deep reflection, and deep attention. And I think one of the sad things is we don't teach apology. We teach prayer, right? We teach the attention that prayer requires. We teach the humility it requires. We teach the, the all of the things that are embedded in the practice of prayer. But we don't teach the practice of apology, which to me is the most critical thing we have to learn how to do, because we are very flawed beings. We are all sinners. We are all people who are both possessed with dark and light, and we all have egos, and we all have hearts, and we all have complicated ways of being, and we've all been brought up in a racist, sexist, patriarchal, capitalist world. So we're polluted. We have a lot of work to do to clean ourselves and to remake ourselves. And so what is the single most powerful tool for that, to me, is apology, because it's the way of cleansing. It's the way of saying, oh, wrongdoing, I own what I have done, let's move forward. But because patriarchy has put such a stigma around it, right? And made people feel that apology is a form of weakness, as a form of the greatest strength, right? People are so afraid of it. And I think what I learned is that there are 4 stages to it. And I don't want to be totally prescriptive, because I'm sure everybody has their own version of it. But for me, the process I went through with my father was, first of all, who are we? Who are we? What made us? What created us? What went into making us? Our families, our culture, our religions or non-religions. Who are we? What went into making us into the kind of beings that are capable of doing, in my father's case, hideous acts of both sexual violence and physical violence? Like what my family made me, what my culture made me, what happened to me in a patriarchal society that I grew up. So it's really doing that kind of self-examination. Then it's looking at, what have I done? What are the real details of what I've done? And I think that is the hardest thing for people to look at, because when you get down into the details, that's when the tire meets the road. It's when you have to really look at yourself and say, okay, I did this. I came into her room in the middle of the night when she was sleeping. I sat by her bed. I pretended to care for her. But what I did is I took her underpants down. I did A, B, C, and D. This is what, and I think that is where, in my opinion, the person making the apology and the person hearing the apology get free. Because so much of what's happened, for example, to women who have been abused, is not only do we never talk about it, or we are never allowed to bring it up, but when we do bring it up, we're told we made it up. We're told it wasn't that bad. We're told we're gaslit all over the place, like it really wasn't happening, and we're made to feel even worse once we do bring things up, right? So for somebody to take the time to walk through and own what they've done, look at what they've done, piece it out in detail, is your liberation, because so much of what you believe, particularly if things happen to you as a child, is that you're crazy, that you're making it up, that it didn't really happen, that you are a bad person and that's why this happened, or that you just fantasize this, or blah 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 blah. But when somebody finally sits down and says to you, no, actually, this is what I did to you, you're like, oh, that explains all of this and everything I felt. So that's step two. Then the third thing is to look at what is the impact of what you've done on the person you've done it to? What happened to that person as a result of what you did? In my case, my father sexually and physically abusing me. He basically devastated my life for many, many, many years. And I went in a particular direction, whether it was alcoholism, whether it was promiscuity, kind of self-hating promiscuity, whether it was drug addiction, whether it was not being able to remember things because I had to destroy my memory because all my memory led back to those horrible moments, whether it was not being able to pay attention because I was so, whether it was leaving my body at a very young age and disconnecting from my body. So I wasn't there sexually. So a lot happened to me that I probably wouldn't have ever agreed to, or I left my body so I wasn't aware when I was sick. So when I was in, my 50s, I got stage 3/4 cancer that I should have been well aware of long before it happened because the signs were there, but I didn't see those signs because I wasn't connected to my body. There were so many things that came as a result of my father hurting me and molesting me. My inability to be intimate, my inability to trust men, and my need to punish men for eternity, right? And we can go down the list of all the things that created in me. And so my inability to trust women because my mother didn't protect me, right? It created a dynamic in my family where my brother and sister and I were unable to ever be friends, right? I mean, there were so many implications of that and so many consequences. And I think looking at that is critical. And then the fourth thing is obviously taking responsibility and saying, I'm sorry. All of those steps indicating that you would never be capable of doing this again because you have gone through some profound time for inner reflection and inner self-realization and admittal, and that you have changed, right?
Well, let me just probe one aspect of apology that I found really fascinating as I was thinking about it in relationship to your story. The saying in the book of Genesis that the sins of the father are visited unto the children unto the seventh generation. I was just wondering about kind of the collateral effect of the apology of your father, not only on you, but on your family. Because it's like a pebble in a pond, every act ripples out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And therefore the apology, and has that had any effect on your family, on any of the ecology of relationships within which you were at that time beyond yourself, his apology to you through the book?
Oh, it's definitely had an impact. My brother was very, very impacted by it. What I've been very, very moved by is how many men have written me to talk about how the book affected them and how they need to apologize. And actually, we've begun to receive a few apology letters that people have written to their victims and to people they needed to apologize to. And I think what's exciting to me about that is that I think, what Tony Porter always says is we've called men out, now we need to call them in. I think we haven't created mechanisms for men to really be able to come forward to own what they've done without killing people off, right? And I think one of the things I learned from this book is that I hold my father completely accountable for what he had done to me. Like my father, he didn't get off the hook at all. As a matter of fact, I think he got more and more on the hook as the book went along. But
clearly.
But I had never allowed myself to feel the pain in my father, to feel what patriarchy had done, what the monster it had created of my father, right? I had never allowed myself to know how lonely my father was, how vanquished my father was, how far away from his soul my father was, how unable he was to live the life he wanted to live, how patriarchy had him in a box and had him in chains. And knowing that, learning that was profoundly liberating for me, because it got me to understand it wasn't about me. It wasn't about me being a bad person or a loose girl or too sexual or blah, 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 blah. It was my father. And it was what patriarchy had done to my father. And I was just the thing in front of him that he took that out on. And that was so relieving for me, because so much of my life I have internalized my father's actions, my father's bad actions, in the fundamental belief that I'm a bad person, right? Like that is the thing I've had to overcome all my life, this fundamental feeling that I'm inherently bad, because not only did my father, have sex with me early on and rape me early on, but then he beat me and beat me and beat me. Not only did that force me to betray my mother, right? So that I could no longer be her ally, but also he put me in this very, very strange predicament in my family where I was the most special, but also the most hated. So that created this both huge self-esteem with enormous grandiosity, which was really very strange. There were a lot of pieces to that. And I think understanding is different than a non-accountability, right? Like understanding why my father did what he did allowed me to release my father, because that understanding took it off me, right? And I think sometimes we won't think about perpetrators because we say they don't have, and I said this for many years, like my father's not going to get that attention from me. He already destroyed me. I'm not going to pay that. Well, in fact, it was that attention that was my liberation. But I had to take many years to be able to do that. Before I was ready to do that, I had to do a lot of work on myself to get rid of that anger, to process that anger, to release that anger, on and on.
Yes, yes. Well, I think that's a good note, V, to transition from apology to forgiveness. I'd like to talk a little bit about forgiveness, and I would like to approach it through a story of Simon Wiesenthal, who I think opened up as a young Jew in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany the question of forgiveness that has striking resemblance to your own story in a very deep way, but also calls up the mystery of forgiveness and how it actually comes about. For those of you who may not know, Simon Wiesenthal was a young man in his early 20s when the war broke out. He found himself in a concentration camp. He was ordered to be part of the hospital staff, and he was treating German soldiers that came in wounded. And one day he was called by his superior, and he thought he was going to be executed, but instead he was brought up to a room with a German soldier that was there who was dying. And the soldier, with a terrified Simon Wiesenthal standing in front of him, not knowing if this was his last breath, if he said one word, he said, "I just wanted to talk to a Jew before I die, and I want to apologize." Mm-hmm. And he told a story to Wiesenthal of what he had done to the Jews, and it had destroyed his soul. And he believed that he was killed because of his sins. And as part of his last breath, he asked Wiesenthal, "Please forgive me on behalf of your people." And Wiesenthal could not do that. He couldn't forgive what at that time was unforgivable to him. And I'm sure I wanted to raise it because I'm sure at some points of your own odyssey, what your father did was not forgivable. And it takes a certain moral development and maturity to be able to come to the capacity to even begin to forgive. But this was also an irritant in Simon Wiesenthal's psyche, and he wouldn't go away, and he became one of the great Nazi hunters, as you all know. But he couldn't let go of the fact that when it came right down to it, he couldn't forgive that German soldier, and that German soldier died unforgiven. And so one of the things that we did with Wiesenthal is we convened a conference, bringing together scholars around his book, The Sunflower, and where he had done the same. He had invited Jewish and Christian scholars to contemplate, is it possible to forgive the unforgivable? And there was a very interesting spectrum of views between those who felt that you could and those who felt that you could not. So I wanted to just open up our discussion of forgiveness by that story, because I think, like apologizing in an authentic way, the act of forgiveness is equally profound, mysterious, and for many people unobtainable for many, many, many years. And so just wanted to explore against this backdrop your own sense of how does forgiveness come in the soul of someone who's been traumatized almost beyond understanding, let alone any moral boundaries of credibility. How did that emerge in your own spiritual journey?
Well, I think I may say something surprising about forgiveness. I don't know if I believe in it. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say. But it's one of those things that I feel is strangely hierarchical. Like, I forgive you. Like, am I even in a place to forgive anyone? Like, I don't even know if that such a thing is true. I think we've used forgiveness religiously, which I've had a very hard time with, about, forgive and forget. And I can't tell you how many survivors I've heard, told, you just need to forgive and move on. Black people are told all the time, just forgive and get over it. So it has a bad reputation, has a lot of bad association with it. If I just get out of the word forgive is really interesting because it's forgiving, right? It's forgiving. And I think that aspect is interesting because it's giving something to somebody. But I think what is true for me is this. I think if you go through a deep and rigorous apology process with someone, there is liberation, right? There is liberation, meaning I'm not going to walk around hating you for the rest of my life. I'm not going to walk around with rancor in my heart and bitterness in my heart. And I'm not going to be sending you daggers every time I possibly can when I think about you. And I'm not going to be engaged in this ongoing relationship where I'm your victim and I'm going to prove to you over and over again how much you destroyed my life, right? Which occupied so much of my life with my father, right? That's done. I'm no longer in that story. I'm no longer in that narrative. I'm no longer engaged in that ongoing conversation, proving to him how he destroyed my life, right? Yes. To me, that liberation is as good as it gets. I don't think we get better than that. If you want to call that forgiveness, call it forgiveness. To me, it's when you have apologized so deeply and truly that you have gotten to the core of the wound, and in doing so, you have released the wound, right? I don't think forgiveness can come unless people honestly go through. I don't think that release can happen unless you either go through that inside yourself with a therapist or with a counselor or with somebody who can help you write your own letter to yourself, or where you go through that with another person. And I think sometimes I feel like we want to rush through things, right? Forgiveness is like, well, just forgive. Well, no. That is hard earned. That release, that liberation means that the structural reality around you has to be transformed. Like for a man to apologize means that he has stepped out of some patriarchal reality and gone into a deep, deep process inside himself, outside this culture, which is already changing the structure of the culture by the act of doing that apology, right? That changes something inside another person, and that takes time, and that takes attention, and that takes compassion and care, and I think that is where freedom can come from. I don't know about forgiveness. I don't know. It's one of those terms I'm highly suspicious of, because I have seen people be pushed into it. And I've seen people be guilt tripped about it. And I don't know. Is it up to me to forgive you? I don't think it's up to me to forgive you. I think you have to do the work that gets you released from your own prison, right? And gets you released from your own bad doings. And you can do that with other people, and you can work on that with other people. But how can I forgive you? Like, that works on you, I don't know.
It's interesting. What's coming up for me is the words of Jesus on the cross. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. It's interesting in light of what you just said. Jesus didn't say, I forgive you.
He didn't. He didn't
asked
at all.
The Father in heaven to forgive them because
exactly.
they knew not
there
what
is
they did.
There's a higher being in yourself, whether you believe in God, whether you believe in that. There's some higher sense of ourselves that maybe can do that work, but I can't do that work. That it's not on me. And I think it's actually unfair to put that burden on victims to forgive you. I understand why he didn't forgive that German. It wasn't up to him to forgive that German, right? It was up to the German to do that work in himself, to figure out why he had done what he had done and agreed to go along to commit those atrocities. And I don't know. I think this is where I get into the patriarchal reality of religions, which is there's this kind of forced mandate, and it's usually put, to be honest with you, on marginalized people, whether it's women or Black people or Indigenous people, or we can go down the list, to forgive, right? The burden's on us, right? Where actually I don't accept that burden. I feel like my burden is to do the work inside myself to release me. Look where I have harmed people. Look where I have not behaved well. Look where I have acted out of unconsciousness, and to make amends for that, and to do constant work on that. And it's not up to me to require people to forgive me for that. It's up to me to make my amends, and it's up to me to make my apologies. And then whatever happens, happens.
Well, I think there's an insight for me, both in your story and in, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. I was struck as I was reading your book, that there was a deep empathy that had grown up in you over time that was expressed so poignantly through the apology, of how you began to realize that your father was a simple human being, tortured in his own way, suffering in his own way, that would have led him to act in the way that he did. So I think both apology and forgiveness, as I would understand them, are based on a deep empathy.
Yes, for sure.
That enables us to move from victimizer and victim to a sense of shared humanity. On the one hand, as Dante says in the Divine Comedy, he never heard of a crime that in his heart he knew that under certain circumstances he himself would be able to commit. And on the other hand, a deep understanding that whether victim or victimizer, we're engaging in a common humanity, and it's our capacity to eliminate whatever the toxicity out of our own selves that is really at the heart of liberating others.
Totally, totally. And what I will tell you is that writing this book, look, I think for many years now, I've been feeling, I grew up in a family with a tyrant who eviscerated everyone in his path. And all of us were different personalities. So he would go for wherever our particular Achilles heel is, because tyrants, and psychopaths are just tuned into it and know how to do that. But one of the things I witnessed when I was growing up is the way he attacked my brother. And to be honest with you, in some ways, it hurt me much more than what he did to me, because I was a witness. And I think sometimes being a witness is a far worse thing than being a victim, because you are in that horrible position where you aren't intervening on that person's behalf. And one of the things I think I watched is the process of my father undoing my brother's self-esteem, self-manhood, his beingness, his brilliance, his confidence. It was unbearable. It was unbearable to witness. And I think what happened writing this book is I tapped into that sorrow in myself. I tapped into the sorrow of what patriarchy has done to boys and men, how it has robbed them of their souls, how it has separated them from their hearts, how it has made them unable and disallowed them to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to express doubt, to show their delight and curiosity in the world without being called whatever, to wear skirts if they want to wear skirts, to dress with wings if they want to put wings on, to be just wondrous human creatures of the world. And lately I'm working on this new musical that's opening in December about climate change. And there's a character in the play who is a bully. His father is just this mean, farmer. And he's just a mean guy because he's overwhelmed by poverty and by all the other circumstances. And there was a scene that was happening where there's a scene at the end where this bully comes into his heart and he sings this song. And I went out of the rehearsal afterwards and I went into the bathroom stall and I sobbed literally like I haven't cried. I would, and it was like, I felt in my body what patriarchy has done to men, and in turn, what it has done to the earth. It was all like one river of pain. And I'll tell you one other story that's connected to this. Years and years ago, I was in Kosovo after the war, and we were going around helping people who had lost their houses and had damage, and we found this woman, and her house had been destroyed. There was graffiti all over it and it was burned down, and they were sleeping outside on the ground. And she was just bereft because she hadn't seen either of her sons in 2 years. So we said we'd come back the next day, and we got them mattresses, and we came back. And as we walked into her lawn, there was this big, beautiful man, and he came running towards me, and he had just come home. It was her son. And when he saw me, I think because Americans had supported Kosovo in the war, I don't know, whatever, he threw his arms around me and he started to sob uncontrollably. I mean, wail in my arms. And I had two thoughts. Oh my God, there is a man wailing in my arms. And the other was, oh my God, there is a man wailing in my arms. Okay. And both those things were happening. This was many years ago. But I went, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You are judging this man for wailing? Are you what? I was stunned to see how I did not allow, because of the patriarchy embedded in me, this man to express that vulnerability. And it was a life-changing moment for me because I saw the walls everyone in the culture puts up, men, women, mothers, fathers,
Exactly.
to allowing their sons to express what girls are always allowed to express and encouraged to express, you know? And I think for me, it was a very, very, very profound moment. And I think part of what I'm really experiencing lately is how do we in ourselves acknowledge what we don't let men feel, what we don't let men be, right? And one of the reasons I so love what's happening with gender and this non-binary, just this whole uprising of refusing to heed to these definitions of gender, is it's absolutely breaking apart
Exactly.
who we have to be and who we have to lined up to be. And I so admire the youth right now. I so admire young people who are forging this new path and saying, I'm going to stand in all of the aspects of myself and the complication of myself. And I'm not going to be limited to your boxes, right? I'm going to open up new territories and new terrains and new realms where I get to be free. And I get to constantly be finding myself and constantly redefining myself. And that is how we are going to bring down patriarchy. Like that is one of the big ways that it's going to happen, you know.
I agree. And it's a wonderful thing to see it. And you can also see patriarchy striking back.
Oh, yeah.
Wherever that liberation takes place with a vengeance, particularly in the United States, with the laws in Texas and even creating bounties on women who even want to have abortions, let alone engage in any kind of gender fluidity. So we're the more liberated we become, the more restrictive the old order also becomes. And that raises a question that I wanted to ask you that came up with Michael Mead the other day. And then after that, I'd like to invite George and Caponelli and Lion Goodman to join with any comments or questions they might have, and then we can go to the chat. But what he was saying, V, was as an elder, you know, now having been with Robert Bly and James Hillman in the beginnings of the men's movement back in the 70s and 80s. And I asked him about, you know, how he was viewing the contemporary reality. And he said, well, it feels that we're experiencing a return of the repressed. That what we thought in the 60s and the 70s is this explosion, you know, the flower generation, we were going to take it all on. We were going to bring the world into paradise one way or the other. And to experience, as we have around the world, the rise of authoritarianism, reactionary tendencies everywhere, the stresses of the pandemic, climate change spinning out of control. But he used this term of the return of the repressed. And I just wanted to get, you know, your comment, because like Michael, you've not only been one of the illuminators of the women's movement, but you've been in it for long enough to see unfolding events over time. And so at one level, we're becoming more and more liberated. But if you look around, we're also becoming more repressed in a very overt and coercive way, simultaneously and with particular intensity in the last couple of years. So we'd just like to have your comment on that.
Well, I always think about what Carl Jung said about this century, that the only way to survive this century is to hold two existing opposite thoughts simultaneously, right? And I think one of the reasons people are going so mad right now is that it is that very thing that we are pushing in some ways. It's the most, if you look at Black Lives Matter and you look at what happened after George Floyd, it is truly the most profound outpouring of every person and shape and size, color, age in this country coming out and understanding that racial injustice is at the heart of the wound of this country, along with what happened in stealing lands and the genocide towards the indigenous. I think that was like the most amazing thing we've seen. And now we're seeing
Ordinary.
the most insane pushback against critical race theory and teaching Toni Morrison and voting rights, and just go down the list, right? Like white supremacists are just going, no, right? But really what's happening is what's been here all along is being manifest. We are in a reckoning, right? To me, we are in the center of reckoning. And reckoning is volatile. It's volatile and it's repressive, because those who are being called out want to shut down everything that it's like, what was I saying? I was saying this to there's a beautiful James Baldwin quote where he says, and I'm paraphrasing it badly, but basically, when you're educating, when you're becoming educated, what happens to you is you realize the world that you're living in is not the world that you're living in, and you suddenly must revolt, right? And so one of the reasons, of course, that people want to shut down climate change teaching or the teaching of critical race theory or Toni Morrison is they don't want people to revolt against this world. On the other hand, I'm just going to say, I have seen, if you look at what's happening in youth in terms of gender revolution, if you look at the climate change movement and the youth movement, if you look at the women's movement, we have never seen such a sexual revolution that is happening on the planet right now. It is happening everywhere, on every corner of the earth. I mean, in 1 Billion Rising, we have hundreds and thousands of people who rise every year in radical body, artistic, passionate ways. So that's happening. So yes, we have never seen such fascism. We have never seen so many countries led by strongmen and dictators. And yet we have all these amazing people like the head of New Zealand and AOC, and we can just go down the list of these powerful women evolving and speaking out. So I don't know if it's the return of the press, or we are literally we're in the midst of a sexual revolution and a radical revolution, and the pushback is just very, very strong. I think it depends on your perspective. I'm going to go further in the middle of the sexual revolution, and we who are those who are the majority, because I believe that, who want that revolution, who need that revolution, who know it's the only way we're going to survive is to deconstruct and dissolve patriarchy and racism and capitalism. We all know that is the path to our survival. And that is the majority of people on this planet. Because the majority of people on this planet, 90% of them are poor, right? And are Black and brown and are oppressed. So we know those people need and fight daily for that liberation, for survival. So I don't know. I think I go back and forth on, these are the worst of times. These are the best of times. These are the end times. These are the beginning times. I feel like we're in a Beckett landscape. That's all I know.
Yeah. Well, as it said, as things are getting better and better, worse and worse, faster and faster.
Exactly. It's moving faster.
George, I want to bring you in to just make any comment or question of V that you would like.
Thank you, Jim. And V, thank you. As I was listening closely to your comments and to this interview, and Jim, you did a masterful job yourself, so thank you. What came to me was that, and I may not say this as eloquently, as clearly as probably should be said, but I almost saw a progression, or did see a progression between the crime, the apology, and then a third step that seems to me to be quite extraordinary, which is either the gift or the gratitude. In some way, I've been aware in my own life, and I thought I heard that in your story, that this spirit, this energy that came into physical form as your father and acted out this gross role of villainy in your life, when coupled with the courage and the willingness that you demonstrated, turns into a gift for all of humanity. And for that, I think all of us need to be incredibly grateful. And again, I know I'm stumbling here, but you were transformed from a victim to a warrior goddess, or whatever we want to call you today, you know? But that probably could not have occurred if it were not for this insane partnership that you were in with your father, who was the villain. But from that, there is a magnificence, there is a beauty that you, in a kind of weird form of alchemy, have given to the world. So I don't know how that fits in the stream of things, but that was just an experience I had as I was listening to you.
I hear you. Well, my mother once said, I don't think this is what you're saying, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think my mother once said to me, just think you wouldn't have done all the amazing work you've done in the world if your father hadn't abused you. And I actually said to her, you know what? I really could have lived without the abuse, right? I really could have lived without it. And I think we do the best with what we've got, right? We do the best with it. But I would like to imagine a world, call me crazy, where we are born into love, where we are born into being seen and safe, where we are born, where we are held, where we are born, where whoever we are appreciated and loved. And maybe, just maybe, the alchemy of that might bring us to places we can't even imagine. Do you know what I mean? So yes, I hear what you're saying, but it's some ways it's what, I work a lot in the Congo with women who have been really badly sexually abused during the war. And we built a beautiful place there called City of Joy, which is this revolutionary center and a sanctuary for really the most beautiful transformation. And what I think sometimes is this word we put on survivors, which is resilience. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I have problems with it. I feel like yes, we are resilient, but what if we didn't have to be? What if our lives were lives in which we weren't having to be engaged in this battle with people who were coming at us constantly to eviscerate us and eradicate us? Who would we be? I have met maybe 2 or 3 people in my life who I honestly believed were loved as children, were loved. And they are amazing. No, they are amazing. They have confidence. They are creative. They believe they can do anything. They're kind to people. So I just sometimes think, what would it be like? What would it be like? And that's not to say I don't understand what you were saying, George,
And also, V, I want you to know that I long for the same world. I weep for it constantly when I look around at what we do with and to each other.
Yeah.
And I just a tiny quick story. I was blessed to run an organization, and we gave awards out. And one year we gave one to Stevie Wonder. It was an integrity award. And he came and he told a story that when he was little and lost his sight, he used to hear sounds and he would bang on things to try to replicate them. And oftentimes he broke them. And his mother would come and clean up the mess and put another thing in its place.
How beautiful.
And he did not know at that time that they were so poor that his mother couldn't replace the things that he broke.
Oh,
But when I heard that story, I and it lives inside of me because I think the way you do. What would happen is every mother, every father did that. How many other geniuses would be occupying the planet,
Absolutely.
you
We
know?
have we have like the human soul is so genius. And
Yes.
I watch my own brother. I watch so many people in my life who didn't, my mother never got to be herself, never got to manifest what she was meant to do here because of so much fear and so much violence and so much poverty and so much thing that surrounded her. And I think what what I think we all have to keep imagining, and really I think the imagination is so critical to where we are right now. It is our greatest tool for building the new world. Is like, what would a world look like where we didn't have to survive, where we thrived, where we didn't have to push back against cruelty, but where we could actually move forward. You know, someone was saying the other night, you've worked all these years to end violence against women, and it's so much worse now than it's ever been. How do you keep doing it? How do you keep going on? And I said, look, there's some days I just feel like I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to say another time, another minute. We need to stop women being raped. We need to stop women. I'm at the point where I literally can't keep saying it. But I said to them, we don't know where we'd be if those of us hadn't done what we've
Mm.
done. We've kept it like this. We've kept it like this. When the question is, are we going to actually go forward? When are we going to get out of just maintaining this and really actually move us to the next stage of human evolution and human consciousness? And that is so interesting right now, because if we do not do that, if we do not push forward, we will not survive. Like, so we are being called, you know, really called to push our consciousness to go where it has never gone before. And imagination, I believe, is the pathway there. It is the pathway. Right.
And don't ever forget that we're getting to that place
Yeah. Yeah.
because your contributions as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George. That's such a beautiful story about Stevie Wonder. I'll carry that with me.
Yeah. Lion, do you want to come in at this point?
Sure. V, I first just want to honor you for your articulate exploration of this very, very difficult topic. It's brilliant, and it
Thank you.
shines like a big light into our consciousness. So thank you for that.
Lion.
My wife and I have done similar work. We did a process called gender reconciliation, in which the men and the women each were separated in large groups, and they each looked at how have I been hurt by the other gender, and how have I hurt the other gender.
Mm-hmm.
And then we brought them together into small groups of 4 women and 4 men, and each of them spoke to the other and apologized to the other for the way they've hurt, and then spoke about how they have been hurt. And it felt so balanced because both men and women have hurt each other in so many ways. And it was incredibly enlightening and opening and touching. There were tears throughout the room. And my wife also has pointed out that that shame gets in the way of apology, just as you were saying before, that our patriarchal beliefs prevent men from apologizing because we're feeling the shame. And if I'm feeling shame, I have to defend. I can't open. I can't be vulnerable. So, so shame is at the core of this issue that prevents us as men from really looking at what we've done. Because when I recognize what I've done in my past, it feels horrible. I wrote an apology to women about 15 years ago, which I put in the chat box to express that, because I saw that when in workshops, when I apologized to a woman, I took the form of her father or her brother, or whoever abused her, and apologized from that place. It was very transformative. So we can each take part in this process by representing each other. We're all one humanity, right? I'm your father, I'm your brother, I'm your sister, I'm
Exactly.
everything.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
we just need to find that apology to each other all the time. It's so fundamental to our humanity. So
And I,
you're
and
still
I love what you're saying, Lion, so much. And I think what I sometimes feel about apologies is that there's all this stuck energy here. It's just stuck, and it becomes tar-like, and it becomes toxic, and it becomes. And every time someone truly apologizes, I really believe this. It just goes. I'm very much about vibrational reality and living in energetic vibrations. It's just the way I've always been. And I can walk into a room and I can feel immediately where the vibration is in the room. And, you know, every time we apologize, we raise the vibration, we lift the vibration. And I'll tell you an amazing story. When I did the Vagina Monologues Off-Broadway, you know, somebody once said to me a long time, writing is the best revenge. And it certainly is. Like, if you want to get back at people, you know, tell a story, right? And so there was a monologue I had written called The Flood. And there's a woman in it who has a very bad experience when she's younger, and she never has sex again. But I put a name. When I was in 5th grade, 2 boys in my class stripped me in front of the whole school, right? And they pulled my underpants down in front of like the whole class as it was coming out. And I was 10 years old. It was a devastating experience. And I put their names together, Andy Lefkoff, into this piece as the name of this woman's person who had humiliated her, right? And it was just my little way of working it out, right? Anyway, about I don't know, 2 years after the show was on Broadway, I got a letter from one of the guys. And he said to me, I saw your show. And I just wondered, was that me? Because I have never, ever had a day pass in my life that I haven't felt horrible about what I did to you in 5th grade. And I want to make amends to you. And I want to say I'm sorry for it. And I was just blown away. It was just like, wow. And I was like, it's done. It's done. Consider it, take it off. And then I was on a book tour and his wife came and she came up to me and she said, I am here to apologize. I said, you all can stop. You made your amends. It's real. It's done. You don't have to keep apologizing. But it was really amazing to me because I could feel the alchemy of the piece was doing its, let's help everybody. It's so easy to apologize. Don't make it so hard. It's so much easier to apologize and be wrong than it is to constantly be right. And I really want to say that I love to apologize now. I love to be like, okay, I'll own it. There's no skin off your teeth. It's just do it. Because when you do it, it allows other people to do it. And when other people do it, it allows other people to do it. And then we all get into a world where we're flawed, imperfect people in a process of trying to do the best we can with egos and with needs and with, like, we're animals. Let's face it. We are basically animals. Like, and I'm owning my animal every day that I'm alive, but I'm an animal. I have animalistic needs. I want to be seen. I want to eat. I want the best thing. That's me, right? And then there's me who actually is trying to be a little more evolved than that. So we're all in that. Nobody's outside that. No one's better than that. No one has arrived. And I think apologies are the way you actually move yourself into the circle. You move yourself into the circle. You become part of humanity. And where else do you want to be? You want to be better than us all? It's a very lonely place, very lonely. And I think men are really lonely. I think they're really lonely. I think they're really alone. I think they're cut off and they don't know who they are anymore. They don't know what role they're playing. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing anymore. So come and apologize. Come be with us. It's fun here, you know?
We talked about that yesterday in the Man Box panel. Is talking about how when we're in the man box, we're separated from everything. We're separated from women, from other men, from nature, from the world. And what you're saying is that apology melts that man box and we get to be in the world. We get to be human. We get to be real.
And it's so much better. It's so boring to just be oppressing and dominating and mansplaining. And it's just not interesting. It's boring. Like,
it's also very hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very hard. And I think that's really why Jim and Lion and I are doing this thing
Yeah.
called Masculine Dialogues. And I'm just really grateful for your contribution to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm grateful that you as men are doing this. You know, it's exactly what has to be happening right now. It's exactly what has to be happening right now. Bravely, you know, I remember in the early days of the feminist movement, you know, when we were all out there and people were calling us crazy and, you know, we were breaking out of that box, right? And it was lonely and people were threatened but you know what? We did it. And now men have to do the same thing. And men have to, like you all, bravely lead and bravely step out and bravely change it all. And when that happens, more men will get brave and then more men will get brave. And I see it in this younger generation. These young men are just different. They're not holding on to, they see what it's done. They see the devastating impact of it, you know?
Yeah, very true.
Oh, V, thank you for this very profound and illuminating discourse on apology. You've brought us to the heart of the masculine dialogues, and I think you've pointed with the power of your own story, the pathway that all of us now need to tread as we move into the future in a very and increasingly complicated world.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only about managing the opposites, it's about managing the integrity of our own souls by constantly saying we're sorry for the inadequacies that are contributing to the very complexities we seek to overcome. So I just want to thank you for your time. I wish you all the best with your plays coming up. I hope I can get to New York sometime next spring to see the play, The Apology, and look forward to having you back down the trail. This has been very profound and very redemptive, I think, for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I've loved talking to you.
Be well.
Okay.
Then in a few hours at noon Pacific, everyone, Lion Goodman will be convening a panel on men in relationship with other men. Yesterday, George convened a panel on men in relationship to women. Now we're going to have our next session on men in relationship to men, and hope to see you all there. But V, brilliant.
Thank you all, beautiful
Sublime.
men, doing your beautiful work, transforming human consciousness. Thank you.
You know, it reminds me of what John Lennon said, that love is, what love means is saying you're sorry 1,000 times a day.
Yep, it does. And just practice it. It feels good. It's like prayer. It's a form of prayer. It is, you know.
Thank you. All right, everyone. We'll see you in a couple hours for session 6 of our Masculine Dialogues. Be well.
Bye.
Bye-bye.